Yes, football is dangerous. Basketball is very dangerous with the 4 million emergency room visits every year. But the most dangerous sport of all is soccer. Nihanda Radio has brought a story from 2018 showing why this is. A coach was running a sports academy in the Johannesburg area in Soweto, and there were 29 boys under his care living together with him in a house. His practice was to beat them into submission and rape them. 29 schoolboys aspiring to be future soccer stars have been rescued from a Joburg soccer academy after months of allegedly being repeatedly raped and beaten by their coach. Maybe they dropped the ball, maybe they kicked it out of bounds instead of into the goal. The coach would beat and rape them. The traumatized boys, aged between 9 and 18, were too frightened to report their 4-month ordeal at the football school in Protea Glen, Soweto. Some of the victims on Thursday said the coach constantly beat them into submission, which was followed by molestation and rape. The coach beat them? Beatings are not a rarity in soccer, as we see in this headline from Kenosha, Wisconsin. You often hear about one team beating another. And once those vulnerable young boys get alone in the locker room with the coach, anything can happen. Norwegian authorities have charged a man in his 20s, reportedly a football referee, with sexual offenses involving some 300 teenage boys, the biggest such case in the country's history. The charges include rape. The coach beat and raped 29 boys. The referee did more than 300. Which is why football has been accurately described as a school of brutality. Some of the most popular amusements, such as football and boxing, have become schools of brutality. They are developing the same characteristics as did the games of ancient Rome. The love of domination, the pride in mere brute force, the reckless disregard of life are exerting upon the youth a power to demoralize that is appalling. As we see from this statement by the police, it is clearly unfortunate and extremely regrettable, but we had no idea of the extent of the case at that stage of the investigation. Police official Sindre Stava told the Verdensgang newspaper. He was in a cycle of dependence he could not stop, Lerum said. He finds it abominable that so many people are suffering because of him. A powerful influence to demoralize the youth? That was the football referee in Norway. He just couldn't stop seeking new sexual encounters with underage boys. The police were surprised at the extent of the activity because they hadn't read this citation from the learned authority that football is just a school of brutality, as we also saw in the case from the soccer academy in Soweto.
Every summer, Barry Bonnell would head abroad, often to America. He was fated there, a top British coach, a star maker. He'd spend 3 days on the beach with the English boys he'd taken with him, separated from their families. Back then, Cian Brownlee was an aspiring young footballer. He recalls how Bonnell used his popularity to exploit innocent teenagers in his team.
We started hearing stories amongst the boys on the team, that he was just maybe asking a kid to sit on his lap, on the trip there, on the way back. And he was often alone with players and the parents weren't there.
Cian was invited to England to train at Crewe Alexandra. It was then he witnessed brazen Bonnell's abuse close up.
In the camper behind this house where we were staying waiting for this trip, and another player, a friend of mine that we were going on the trip with, we were just watching 101 Great Goals and watching the 1986 World Cup tape, and Barry was in bed with the little English boy.
And you must have felt uncomfortable at that stage?
We were frightened to death.
Bunnell's reign of terror finally ended when he was jailed in Florida in 1995. He pleaded guilty, but there was no remorse, just typical defiance.
Mr. Bunnell, did you rape this child?
No. No.
Bunnell had even received a letter of support from his boss at the time, Dario Gradi. It read, "I have known Barry for just over 10 years and he has worked for me for about 5 of these years. Not once during that time have I ever received a complaint from a boy or his parents of a sexual nature." But Bunnell had been coaching in America for years, so how did he manage to get away with it? Barry Bunnell's connections with Crewe and the club's reputation for finding future stars essentially gave Bunnell an American passport. That's how, a full 6 years before he was convicted in Florida, he was here at this facility just outside Atlanta, coaching the Brookwood Steamers under-12s.
I was then 13 at the time. You know, it should be the time of your life, but all I can remember is what actually happened, the abuse and that side of stuff.
Speaking exclusively to ITV News, one of many talented British boys persuaded by Bunnell to go to the States. His nightmare began the moment he and Bunnell moved in with a family near Atlanta in Georgia.
The family, lovely family, set up the spare room for me, and yeah, I lasted one night in that spare room before, again, he'd spoke to the family. You know, he's fine with me downstairs. He could manipulate anyone. Somebody must have known. This man can't have got away with what he was doing for so long without other people questioning what was happening.
In 1995, Florida's state attorney did write to the FA in London ahead of Bunnell's release from jail and deportation back to England. Mr. Bunnell had a hidden reason for teaching this age group. He molests them, she wrote. I hope this information will serve you and serve to protect other children from abuse at the hands of Barry Bunnell. She never received a reply.
The man's a monster.
The former football coach Barry Bunnell was branded sheer evil and the devil incarnate on Monday after being sentenced to 30 years in prison for subjecting junior players from Manchester City and Crewe Alexandra to hundreds of sexual offences. Bunnell, now facing complaints from another 86 former players, stared at the floor as the judge, Clement Goldstone QC, gave him prison sentences totaling 454 years. An English coach has been correctly identified as the devil incarnate. That is, a physical manifestation of the devil. In this case, please see my video, Demonic Possession in Professional Sports, which sheds further light on this phenomenon of demonic possession. You knew that to each of these boys, football was their life, the career for which they would give anything. You appeared as a God who had it in his gift to help fulfill their ambitions and realize their dreams. In reality, you were the devil incarnate. You stole their childhoods and their innocence to satisfy your own perversion. Bunnell, described by the prosecution as an industrial-scale child molester and a predatory and determined pedophile, made a point of not looking at his victims. And this is the real source of the problem. There will always be perverts and potential pedophiles in society. But with sports, it's a discipline where a lot of children are willing to do anything to get to the top. And once people are willing to do anything, bad things can happen. If they hadn't been taken to soccer practice with Barry Bunnell, or to the football games in Norway, where this deviant referee was presiding, or for that matter enrolled in the soccer academy in Soweto, these horrible actions would never have occurred. Instead, the children were subjected to a trip to hell. Once described as the star maker because of his ability to find talented young players, he admitted 7 charges, and the jury found him guilty of the other 43 offenses. I did not want it, did not ask for it, and did not enjoy it, the youngest victim said. I was a child, and between the ages of 10 to 13, that monster decided it was fun for him to use me as a sex toy. My dad finds it very difficult to think that he was taking me to play football and to become the footballer that I always wanted to be, when for 3 years he was actually taking me to hell. The father thought he was doing something nice for his son when he took him to football practice with Coach Barry, but in reality he was taking him to hell several times a week. That's really nasty. There is no such thing as a safe sport, as we learned in the basketball video. All of the sports are risky. Either a risk of contact, or there's the risk of injury from repeated motion, and of course the omnipresent sexual perversion. In 2006, Stuart Twemlow, MD, gave an anonymous survey to 116 teachers at 7 elementary schools and found that 45% of teachers admitted to having bullied a student in the past. In the study, teacher bullying was defined as using power to punish, manipulate, or disparage a student beyond what would be a reasonable disciplinary procedure. According to the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, there are approximately 2.5 million adults in the United States each year who volunteer their time to coach. Using our tentative number of 50% would mean that there are roughly 1.25 million adult coaches who have bullied a child athlete in the past. Why do coaches and referees bully and abuse children? It's because they can get away with it. Like more than 1 million volunteer coaches in the United States do every year. They're mean, they disparage children, they punish and manipulate them, and it's not a secret that this is allowed. So many perverts find their way into the ranks of coaches and referees, if of course they're not inclined to singing prayer chants and associating with altar boys, in which case they enter the priesthood. So who's to blame? These coaches and referees are just plain addicted to sex with young boys. But who takes the children to the practices? Who leaves them alone with the predators? As long as they get results in sports, the coaches can get away with bullying. And if they just happen to be sick perverts, a whole lot more. Why do parents take their children to sports practices? Why do they leave them alone with coaches? Why do they let them go on weekend trips with the coaches, or trips to Florida like they did with Barry Bennell? Another problem is that proper spiritual instruction of the coaches and referees has been neglected. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. But every chance they got, they were checking their neighbor's ass. And when they got the children alone, they could no longer resist their covetousness, and open sin broke out. The sin didn't start when Barry Bennell had a boy alone with him in the locker room. The sin started when they were playing on the field. Barry Bennell was checking out their ass, saying, I'd really like to have that. And then came the sin because he had not been properly instructed in the 10th commandment. Maybe he attended a church where the minister said, the 10 commandments are all done away with. They don't apply anymore. One of these all-grace chapels. And before you know it, these perverts find themselves transitioning from coveting to engaging in sexual relations with young boys.